There are 35 people on death row in the state of Mississippi. This is part 1 of the series. Devin Bennett, 20 years on death row. In February 2003, Bennett was found guilty of capital murder in Rankin County and given the death penalty for felony child abuse, which resulted in the death of his 2-month-old son, Brandon Bennett. In June 2000, Devin Bennett and Yolanda Lewis had a son, Brandon Allen Bennett. Bennett brought Brandon to River Oaks Hospital 2 months later on August 25, 2000 at 8:45 a.m. Nurse Colette Moreland removed Brandon from Bennett, observing that the infant was pale, cold, and not breathing. According to medical documents, Brandon was asystolic, which means he didn't have a pulse or a heartbeat. When the hospital team questioned Bennett about what had happened to Brandon, he replied that he woke up at 4 that morning and saw that Brandon had seemingly slipped from his car seat onto the floor. This was the first of Bennett's at least 7 accounts of what transpired before Brandon passed away. Baby Brandon had multiple bruises and injuries that led the authorities to believe he had shaken baby syndrome, and this was ultimately his cause of death. James Blyatt, 41 years on death row. Wallace Kroll Jr., Blyatt's stepfather, was found dead from a bludgeoning on Thanksgiving Day on November 26, 1981, in his home. Both Blyatt's mother and stepsister, who was just 14 years old, were discovered dead in the house as well. George Hebler, Chris Lee, and 12-year-old Stephen Kroll discovered the bodies. On the morning of November 26, 1981, while returning from Picayune, Mississippi, young Kroll, Lee, and Hebler noticed James Blyatt driving Wallace Kroll's vehicle. They quickly proceeded to Kroll's Leetown community house after growing suspicious. They discovered the victims there, along with an 8-pound sledgehammer that was laying close to the bodies. They also discovered Wallace Kroll's wallet and a few other papers lying on the floor. James Blyatt allegedly threatened to kill his mother and stepfather on November 7, 1981, while the two were at the Living Waters Church of God in Picayune, Mississippi, according to Brian Strickland, a native of Leetown and Blyatt's acquaintance. In his deposition, Leo Jones stated that he encountered Blyatt hitchhiking on November 26 and offered to drive him from Picayune to the Leetown neighborhood. James Blyatt insisted on being let out by a field next to the Kroll residence in Leetown instead of in front of the house. Following the discovery of the bodies, Louisiana and Mississippi issued an all-points notice, and 2 days later, the New Orleans Police Department detained Blyatt. He was extradited to Mississippi following a hearing. Xavier Brown, 21 years on death row. Felicia Newell was discovered dead in her car outside her Hattiesburg, Mississippi apartment building on February 26, 1998. James Bigler and Susan Petrush, 2 witnesses, said they heard a gunshot and saw a black man wearing gloves leave Newell's car. Bigler reported that the man entered the passenger side of what looked to be a blue Cutlass, while holding something hidden in his right hand. Bigler saw another guy wearing white gloves in the driver's seat after the man got inside the vehicle. The car drove away from the crime site. Petrush said that she had contacted both the police and the answering service for her apartment building. Anthony Sims, Newell's ex-husband, was the main suspect in her murder since he had a history of violently abusing her. In March 1998, Newell was also supposed to testify against Sims about a charge related to concealed weapons. "There's a contract out on you," Sims threatened in a voicemail that he left for Newell before the murder. The transmission also records the sound of another person whispering remarks to Sims, who subsequently relayed them to Newell. Sims was discovered by the authorities dead in a motel in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, 2 days after taking an overdose of prescription drugs. The police had no leads after Sims' death was declared to be a suicide. It seemed as though the Newell murder case was over. A man named Donald Crosby informed Newell's friend many months later that Tony Brown, a man, had murdered her. A man called Xavier Brown had boasted to Crosby about killing Newell, and he reported this to the police. According to Crosby, Sims had paid Brown to kill Newell, and Sims had killed himself to avoid having to pay Brown's obligation. Then, on June 10, 1999, more than a year after the murder, a guy by the name of Corey Johnson, who was engaged to Brown's sister, came forward and admitted to the police that he had traveled from Laurel to Hattiesburg with Brown. Johnson said to the authorities that he had witnessed Brown use a 9mm handgun to murder Newell. Additionally, he said that Brown had threatened to kill him if he revealed what he had seen. The state obtained an indictment for Brown based on the evidence gathered from Crosby, Johnson, and two of Newell's eyewitnesses' neighbors, Susan Petrush and James Bigler. Anthony Carr, 33 years on death row. Robert Simon, 33 years on death row. Carl Parker, his wife Bobby Jo, and their two children, Gregory, age 12, and Charlotte, age 9, left the Riverside Baptist Church in Clarksdale on Friday, February 2, 1990, and headed back to their house on Highway 322 in rural Quitman County, which was about 15 miles away from Clarksdale. The Parkers were last observed that evening between 8:45 and 9:15 p.m., leaving the church. While traveling east on the highway at approximately 11 p.m., Billy King noticed a fire at the Parker residence. Mr. King attempted to enter the house through the unlocked carport door, but the fire forced him to retreat. In order to get assistance, Mr. King drove to the closest neighbor's house after leaving the Parkers' home. On his route to the neighbor's house, King did not pass any cars. However, when he turned around at the neighbor's front door to face the Parkers' residence, he noticed two cars leaving the Parkers' home and heading west. Joe McCullough was traveling on the highway east as King was at the neighbor's house attempting to get assistance. In his deposition, McCullough said there were two cars that were rapidly approaching Clarksdale while tailgating. He recognized the Silverado pickup truck as the lead car. Between 11 and 11:20 p.m., Lambert Volunteer Fire Department fireman Jerry Wages received a call reporting the Parkers' fire. He located Carl Parker's body and then returned inside the residence and retrieved Gregory and Charlotte's bodies. Wages remembered that Carl and Gregory had their wrists tied behind their backs, and they were shackled at the ankles and feet. Charlotte's wrist still had a piece of binding on it. Beneath her dress, Charlotte had no clothes on below her waist. Wages reported that she also had a cut on her hip. After the fire was eventually put out, Bobby Jo Parker's body was found in the early hours of the morning. Her body, which had been severely charred, was discovered in the southwest corner of the home. On February 2nd of 1990, Martha Simon, the wife of Robert Simon, had left Memphis and gone to Clarksdale to visit her mother. She added that for the last 3 weeks, Carr had been residing in their Memphis apartment with her and Robert. On February 3rd, 1990, at around 12:30 a.m., Martha noticed Carr strolling down the street while she was in her car. Carr inquired as to whether Martha had seen Robert. In response, Martha said she believed Carr and Robert had been together. Carr was asked how he arrived in town. In response, he said he was driving a truck and gestured in the general direction of the Parker truck's later discovery. Carr informed her that the vehicle had stuff in it and that he parked it on the 9th Street. He mentioned to Martha that he had some cash as well. He informed her where he had hidden some coveralls in a dumpster and that he had left the truck's keys beside the railroad lines. A sealed dumpster close to Martha Simon's mother-in-law's Clarksdale home yielded a pair of coveralls and a pair of work gloves, thanks to information provided by Simon to Coahoma County Sheriff Andrew Thompson Jr. The coveralls had a smoky odor and were damp. Dean Parker, Carl Parker's son, recognized the gloves as being the identical kind he had given his father. The shotgun that was discovered in the truck had Carr's fingerprint on it. 2 arrest warrants were issued in Marks, Mississippi on February 3, 1990. That day, at approximately 3:30 p.m., Anthony Carr and Robert Simon Jr. were taken into custody in Clarksdale. Pathologist Dr. Stephen Hain provided testimony regarding the circumstances behind each Parker family member's death. Following 2 gunshot wounds, Carl and Gregory both passed away. Bobby Jo was shot to death, her body completely charred beyond recognition, and just 1 bullet was found. Young Charlotte was shot 3 times, and she eventually died from smoke inhalation. She had also been essayed, and ultimately that was the reason Carr decided to murder the entire family and burn the house down to make sure no evidence against him would be found. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.